Good morning. My name is David Tong, Global Industry Lead at Oil Change International. I'm joined by Dr. Sindra Sharma of PCAN, Harjit Singh of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative, and Caro Briet of Canarac, Canada. This morning we all received a package of draft negotiating texts released by the Presidency. Countries will be digesting them this morning, and ambition has gone missing in the mitigation room. We are seeing widely divergent positions reflected in the other key negotiating texts. We are concerned about the situation that we are now finding ourselves in. I want to begin, however, by highlighting that the global stocktake decision made last year in Dubai to triple renewable energy, double energy efficiency, and transition away from fossil fuels in our energy systems is not up for debate. The global stocktake is a 5-yearly process under the Paris Agreement. That process was completed last year. Nothing this year is reopening it. And in both options in the UAE dialogue and in the text of the finance goal, the NCQG, there are explicit references to the global stocktake outcomes. The transition away from fossil fuels is there and must not be going away. It's happening in the world around us and it must accelerate. But critically, despite strong calls from numerous countries, this reference and all references to implementing the global stocktake have been deleted from the mitigation work program. Ambition has gone missing from the mitigation work program and must be put back. I'll now hand to my colleague, Dr. Sindra Sharma of the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network. Sindra.
Thank you very much, David. And yeah, I agree. It's been quite a frustrating COP in terms of the ambition we need to see to stay within that 1.5 survival limit. And it's really critical for us as people and communities from small and developing states, because we're really at the forefront of this crisis, and we come back here every year and we repeat the same thing and we don't get the progress that we want to see. But I'm here to talk to you about climate finance. So I'm going to talk to you about the new text that came out yesterday. And we're still really digesting it. It came out early this morning, or later than it was meant to come out this morning. And some of the striking things about it, first, this is a 10-page document, and it's really where we should have started the basis of negotiations when we started this process a little less than 2 weeks ago. It's a lot more manageable, and it shows us very clearly that there are very divergent views, but it captures them just as a few options. So in this case, when we're thinking about the goal, it says 2 options. Again, a very striking thing is, and we're all here to discuss a number, and there is no number. So we are in a little bit of a trap there, because without a number, you can't really know the kind of ambition that you'd want to see. So we know it's going to be a very, very uphill battle as we look further through this day and the next. And then in terms of the elements that we see were stronger in some of the submissions from small island states and least developed countries, but particularly, we were very strong on ensuring that finance doesn't go to the expansion or continuation of fossil fuels. And we don't see that here. We don't really see any kind of definitive sort of direction on what climate finance is, not going towards what it is not. Just on the options now. So the good option, there's a good option. It reflects kind of broadly what developing countries have been asking for. You know, the simple things that that align to what they're meant to deliver anyway, what developed countries are meant to deliver anyway, according to the Convention and the Paris Agreement. And that's the provision and mobilization of climate finance to developing countries. The second option is actually really, I mean, you have to laugh at some of these things, right? The second option is pretty bad. It is looking not at a provision and mobilization goal, it is just a mobilization of all investment flows by all countries. So it's not differentiating between developed and developing. That means all of us are going to be contributors to this goal. But yeah, so that you can see there's very different perspectives there. And then it goes through different elements as well that are extremely important, because while we have a number, it's also about the quality of finance we have and the other elements related to that. So allocation, excess, disenablers, how it goes to address that. But I don't want to take too much time. I wanted to highlight the two options because those are very important. And I will hand back over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you. Harjit Singh from the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty.
As already been said by David and Sindra, we are deeply disappointed and, in fact, outrageous. It is outrageous to see that developed countries have not even put a number on the table yet. After 3 years of negotiations, 14 meetings and several ministerials and more than 10 days of negotiations here, developed countries did not show enough courage to even talk about how big this climate finance goal is going to be. And they want to squeeze that conversation in the last 24 to 36 hours. That's not negotiation in a good faith. And clearly, they do not have the intention to come up with a bold number that is needed. While the draft text acknowledges that the needs are already running in trillions of dollars annually, yet developed countries have not mentioned how big the goal is going to be. On the contrary, developing countries have been mentioning their needs in trillions and also coming up with what is required for mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. But the document does not even talk about the sub-goals that is so fundamental to make sure that we are able to track money. We don't want to see a fuzzy language which only talks about some number and then also refers to loans and grants and also investments, which means that we will never be able to track. And it's absolutely clear. Yes, there is some language on grants, but it doesn't really make it clear how we are going to make sure that grants are provided for adaptation and loss and damage. And that's not going to be helpful at all. And especially vulnerable countries who are suffering climate impacts now, they need to be preparing themselves for climate disasters, and they also need to help people recover from impacts. And it's already running in hundreds of billions of dollars annually. And that's really not coming out in the document. So what we need now is developed countries to step up and put that number on the table. If they do not provide that number, we will not be able to really move forward with any negotiation. And as David said, the mitigation ambition is missing, and that requires money. We cannot live in a situation where emissions continue to go up. We need to help developing countries make that transition, and that transition has to be just. You cannot just mention hollow words which are there that yes, just transition is important, and you don't provide money behind it. Countries like Colombia, like Timor-Leste are stuck with fossil fuels. They are dependent on extraction for revenues. They are showing the courage to move out of the fossil-based economy, but they have no support from this system to make that happen. And that needs to be underlined. And this is the moment. If we miss it now, we are all going to be doomed. I must say that. This is the most important COP. We have got Paris Agreement. We need to ratchet up ambition, but we are not putting money behind our collective action and to make sure that we are bold and ambitious enough to respond to the needs on ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Caro Buriet of Canada.
Good morning. As my fellow panelists have shared, I haven't been to COPs that long, but I don't think I've ever been to a COP with 48 hours left and so little indication of where things are going to land on multiple agenda items, which is quite a scary place to be, given that 2024 has been the hottest year on record, and given the fragile state of climate multilateralism and how essential the decisions that will be taken at COP here, specifically on the next finance goal, are essential to upholding the Paris Agreement. I'll focus my remarks on the Just Transition work program, for which there was also new text that came out this morning. Let me remind you that at COP28, we got a decision on a Just Transition work program, which for the first time within this UNFCCC process addresses the workforce and socioeconomic dimensions of the transition. It recognized rights holders, including workers and indigenous peoples, and it also provided the space to discuss how just transitions apply within an international cooperation lens. So we came to Baku with hope, and our hope was for the Just Transition work program to move away from being a talk shop where countries share best practices and go back home and don't do much, towards actionable outcomes that parties could take together. But what we have seen in the past weeks is parties running around in circles, and that is partly because the co-facilitators have let them to figure things out on their own, so we've lost a lot of time. The new text that was published this morning, nothing was removed from what we had a week ago. There are new things, including, very importantly, the explicit mention of the rights of indigenous peoples in a just transition. We also have a proposal for a just transition guidance framework that includes equity and fairness, and that applies both domestically and internationally. Very interesting things, but very little time left for parties to substantially engage on this new text. And as David and Sindra and Harjit were saying, with views being quite still very far apart. The issue is that outside of these halls, the real world hasn't stopped. The transition already has started. The issue is that it's currently unjust. And while there was nothing just about the fossil fuel economy for workers or communities, we need to make sure that we learn and avoid replicating the old patterns of extraction and exploitation that have gotten here as we transition not only the energy sector, but also the agriculture sector, the transport sector, in this global transformation of the economy. So we really hope that parties can get their act together and get us this crucial political signal that we need, that they want to have a discussion about concrete outcomes. The Just Transition work program actually needs to speed and scale up its activities so that we see world-impacting decisions that puts justice back at the center of the transition and gets us an ambitious package at COP30 in Brazil. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We're now open to questions, first from the media. Any questions from journalists? Now open to questions from anyone in the room.
Okay, in the absence of questions, because we are still digesting this text, just wanted to clarify a few things. First, as Harjit said, developing countries have put numbers on the table, and for us from the Pacific, I always advocate for the Pacific and small island states. We had put a very a clear provision and mobilization number out there, which we hope will be reflected in the final text, because it is going to be taking us furthest to where we need to get to, noting that it's still going to be significantly less than what we actually need. And secondly, loss and damage adaptation, mitigation, and just transition are reflected in the text. But it is now time, and this is why it's so critical, as Caro said, because we've come to this so late, it is now time. We have all the options. for our ministers to start aggressively defending. And we really hope that we can see a balanced outcome coming, a fair outcome, not a balanced, a fair outcome coming out of this COP. Because for us in small island states, this process cannot fail. It is the only multilateral space we have where we have an equal voice. So not having an outcome here and having the process fail is not an option for us, so that we can have that equal voice. Thank you.
What do we need to see in the next 24 hours on the negotiations on the new collective contract?
I can start, and I'm sure my colleagues and friends will add. First of all, we need an ambitious goal, and that's exactly what is missing, and that has to be in trillions. It has been repeated several times, but developed countries have not stepped up. Number two, we need sub-goals. We need to know how much money is being allocated for mitigation, for adaptation, and for addressing loss and damage. Also, we need to make sure that this goal is improving the quality of finance than what has been provided so far, which is full of loans. 70% of money that was provided was loans, which is going to add to the debt crisis. And I must highlight, when we talk about grants, and the document somewhere refers to grants only being prioritized for adaptation and loss and damage, which is welcome, but that's not enough. Countries who need to transition away from fossil fuels, and I just mentioned countries like Colombia and Timor-Leste and others, they also need support in terms of putting the right policy architecture in place. They need to invest into research. They need to invest in reskilling and capacity building of their own people. All that requires public finance. So we need very clear targets on mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. That money has to be in the form of grants, and then we use that money to mobilize and leverage trillions of dollars that is going to be needed every year. And developed countries should treat money, this climate finance, as the debt that they owe to developing countries and not a charity, or try to make money using climate finance as another way to get their corporations to developing countries.
Does anyone want to add anything? Sindra?
So in the next 24 hours, what will happen will be similar-ish process to what we saw at the COP28. I forgot which COP we were in. At COP28 in Dubai, where they'll have a collective sort of exercise of getting everyone together, and then again discussing on this text now. And then following that, it will go into a very heated sort of process of very last-minute negotiations, where we'd have to see the things that Harjeet mentioned and that we've all collectively talked about. But it goes beyond finance. We need to see ambition across the board, because the goal of the finance is, the climate finance, is to catalyze this action. So, I mean, what are we here for otherwise? Thank you.
And maybe I'll take the opportunity to look to Canada specifically. I think actually I said 48 hours, we're less than 48 hours before the official end of COP, and we still, as my colleagues have shared, haven't seen numbers, and we're expecting to see a number from Canada. We're hearing a lot about Canada playing the role of a bridge, especially with recent political events. Now is the moment to be that bridge, and that includes by putting a number on the table. Canada has also been one of the only countries from the global north to really talk about a public provision core. However, they have tended to include mobilization with that, so we need them to be very clear about the need for those two things to be separate, to avoid replicating the mistakes of the 100 billion annual goal.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. Other questions?
Hello. So the question is, given the significant amount of battery production in terms of transition from fossil fuel and the concern that we have around battery production, do you see the, in global sense, the transition to be possible even?
The transition to 100% renewable energy is absolutely possible. It will need a growth in battery production, that is true, but numerous independent analyses from the International Energy Agency, the Rocky Mountain Institute and others have shown that there are sources available to meet that. And as civil society, we call for those sources to be ethical. We call for this transition to be a just one, a people, a community and ecosystem-centred one. We do not want, as Kato said, to replicate the injustices of the fossil fuel economy and the renewable energy economy. We need real safeguards for people as we transition to renewable energy. And we also need to remember that the volume of suffering and extraction in the fossil fuel economy is ginormous, far larger than needed for batteries. We have time for one more question.
Just to Cinder's kia ora. To Cinder's point around catalysing action, finance is obviously really critically important, but so too are moves to phase out fossil fuels. And we heard a lot of talk about this last year, but I'm yet to see all too much meaningful on the agenda this year. So where's that at, and what are you guys calling for?
The first step, when you're in a hole, the first step is to stop digging. The first step to phasing out fossil fuels is to stop extracting more fossil fuels. And we need wealthy countries who have a responsibility to cut emissions first and fastest to lead in this transition. We need the countries that are driving the expansion of the fossil fuel economy to act first and fastest, to immediately commit to stopping new expansion in their Paris targets, their nationally determined contribution, and then to implement real plans to phase out fossil fuel production on a 1.5 aligned timeframe. Because we know that 5 countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, Norway, Canada, and Australia, are on track to be responsible for more than half of all fossil fuel expansion planned between now and 2050. Those same rich countries that are refusing to put a number on the table for finance are those rich countries driving the ongoing expansion of the fossil fuel economy. That must stop now. They must come with finance and they must phase out their fossil fuels. We have time just for 1 minute closing remarks from each panelist. Would anyone like to close up with the final remarks? Harjeet?
Despite being such a frustrating COP so far, I think this is the most important one, and we cannot allow this COP to fail. And I would urge leaders to step up, and particularly developed countries, to show that they are committed to climate action and deliver climate justice by putting a bold number on the table and make sure that it is a high quality finance that meets the needs of developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is the Climate Finance COP, and without clear, ambitious figures, we won't be able to assess what that quality of finance will be as well. But we've got time, all is at play, and we're hopeful that we can get to an ambitious outcome.
We're at a critical moment, not only for the climate after the hottest year on record, but in terms of upholding climate multilateralism and the Paris Agreement, and negotiating an ambitious and fair next new long-term climate finance goal is really a key, crucial pillar of the compromise that was the Paris Agreement. And so we need countries like Canada to step up, to pay up, put a number on the table, and contribute to not only limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, but upholding climate multilateralism at a moment where it is more at risk than ever.
This COP must deliver over the next 48 hours or 72 hours or 4 days even. We need countries to stand firm. We need Global South countries that have been calling for justice to hold the line on their rights. And we need the rich countries that have held back finance, that are driving up fossil fuel production, to put the money on the table. No finance, no phase out. Thank you for joining our press conference. For those who can, well, first, the spokespeople are available for interviews afterwards outside if you wish. For those who can, we encourage you, if you wish, to stay for the next press conference from our colleagues in the Global Campaign to Demand Climate Justice, who will be presenting a justice-centric and Global South perspective on where things are. I encourage you to listen to those voices from the South and those climate justice voices. Thanks very much.